My name is Melissa May White. I'm from Hawaii, and I think they picked me because there's at least a whole ocean between me and all these other presenters. So if I ask really hard questions and offend anyone, it'll be harder to find me. So, I'm excited for an action-packed discussion. This is a really new, emerging topic, and I know everyone has burning questions, and I've been polling everyone all week. Like, what do you want to know about micromobility, but are afraid to ask? And so I've got some juicy questions lined up, and I hope you folks will help me add to that roster so that we can really hash out the issues. This is going to be a very packed lineup, so as the moderator, I might get a little aggressive in keeping us on time, just to warn you guys. But I have a great co-moderator, Rae-Leigh from Toole, and then we have 5 panelists from 5 different cities who are all grappling with the integration of micromobility. We have 3 companies representing providers of micromobility, and then we have a data company, RideReport, to talk about that aspect of things. So without further ado, we're going to get things going. We're going to have, the way things are going to go is Rae-Leigh is going to provide us some background on the evolution of the technology. We'll have a discussion with the cities about what they're facing. Then we'll have a Q&A and with the cities, moderated by me. We'll have the provider panel come up next, which Rae-Leigh will moderate. Then we'll have the data discussion. And so there's going to be a little Q&As following each presentation. And then at the end, we'll do kind of a crossfire with everybody up here, and we'll be taking questions all along the presentation. So here we go. Let's get started with Rae-Leigh from Toole Design.
Hi, good morning. I'm Rae-Leigh with Toole Design. I'm a project planner there and have been specializing in bike share and micromobility for the last few years. When I started, I joined as a bike share planner, and so as you know, in the last few years, with the technology changes, it's been a really fun and interesting year, and our work has evolved to include what we're defining as micromobility, and I'll go kind of over that so you know exactly what we're talking about. So just really brief, I just want to show this map. This is where we've worked, where Toole Design has worked. And one thing I want to point out here is that there are cities all across the U.S., all different sizes and regions that have micromobility programs. So it's for, micromobility can happen in just about any city. So I just really want to highlight that. I had someone ask me, what type of work does micromobility include? And so we do everything from research and writing national guidance to the planning and design of systems and the implementation. Operating systems, we do evaluations, and then we also provide strategic direction, especially now with the new technology changes. So to get started, I want to just talk about the definition of micromobility. And several months ago, we kind of did this brainstorm session to really figure out, this was kind of before that term micromobility was coined. And so we were kind of trying to figure out, what exactly is this? So we looked at shared mobility and what shared mobility is. And it's a fleet of vehicles available to the public, and it's on demand. So what we'll be talking about today is really this micromobility of spots, where we're talking about station-based bike share. We'll be talking about dockless bike share, and then also e-scooters. So I want to provide a brief history, kind of more of the recent history of micromobility. So I'm going to start with just pre-2017. Most systems were station-based. They were also considered smart dock, where all the technology was actually on the dock itself. So you had to go and pay at the kiosk. It was not as flexible. Also, at that time, most systems were run by public agencies and nonprofits. And then there was the introduction of Smart Bike, which is similar to the system, which is the system here in Portland, Bike Town. So it's a little bit more flexible. You can park anywhere, you can park at the station. And the reason it's flexible is because the technology is actually within the bike. So that was a big technology advancement. Okay. Also, since 2017, then dockless systems were introduced. So this allowed bikes to park anywhere. Also, the bikes were less expensive than the programs in the past. And venture capital funding meant that you could have larger fleets. So a lot of these programs started as pilot programs. They were created through MOUs, permits, or other sorts of processes. A lot of things are regulated, including the system size, the levels of service, and most importantly, parking requirements, because that is kind of what you tend to hear in a community is about parking. Okay. Also, there was a launch of e-bikes, and then kind of big players entered into the micromobility world. So, Uber purchased Jump, Lyft purchased Motivate, and then the launch of e-scooters. So, these results have shown that both e-bikes and e-scooters are getting a lot of use. So, people love the electric assist. There has been a larger shift to scooters. At first, there was kind of, different dockless programs were kind of popping up more on the outskirts of some cities, and then they were coming into the bigger cities. So there was a bigger shift into kind of getting into the larger cities, and now cities with traditional smart dock bike share, smart bike share, are now kind of operating these hybrid programs where they may have dockless e-scooters and a traditional bike share program. Okay, and now we've seen a huge expansion of e-scooters, so we would less focus on bikes. NACDO publishes, every year they publish kind of an overview of micromobility. So this past year, for 2018, this is a map that they had. A couple of things, cities of all sizes. From here you can see there was a shift from station-based to dockless. There was also more focus on e-bikes rather than regular bikes, and then rapid rise of e-scooters. And I also want to note that NACDO only presented data on the top 100 cities, so there are a lot of cities missing on this map. And then they also provided a map of where you can see station-based bike share and then e-scooter systems. So I just kind of want to flip through the two maps so you can kind of see where there are the different programs. And you can see it's different cities. Some cities that launched traditional bike share early on, and then some really didn't have traditional bike share, and they have large e-scooter programs. One other thing from the NACDO micromobility overview is that they showed how many trips happened since 2010 in bike share and micromobility. And you can see this year, it just rose exponentially. It was a ton of ridership, and then you can see in the green is station-based bike share, and the yellow or in the orange is scooter trips. So just one thing I want to note here is that generally the traditional bike share programs have less fleet, so they have less vehicles within their fleet. E-scooter systems, there are a ton of e-scooters available. So I just want to note that I'm not discrediting the rise of e-scooters, but I do want to note that. Okay, finally, we did a recent scan. We worked with PBIC, where we interviewed about a dozen cities to try to kind of figure out some of these key findings, what mid-sized cities are dealing with e-scooters. So we actually interviewed different cities, so it wasn't kind of the key top cities in the US, but we're really trying to figure out what some of these cities are dealing with. And so these are our top 8 needs that we found. So the first one, and I think that some of these themes are going to be common themes that you hear throughout the presentation today. So staff up appropriately. It does require staff, and it also depends on what do you want to regulate. If you want to be a hands-on program, then you would have to staff up appropriately. Regulation is necessary, and this is both for the operators and the cities. Even defining what an e-scooter is and where they can operate really helps keep things clear. And also, regulation helps with the goals of the city and with the program, and making sure that some of those, making sure that the program reflects the goals of the city. Identifying a procurement framework. So, is it going to be an RFP, or is it an MOU, or are you just doing a permit program? So there's lots of different ways. Use fees to incentivize. So this can incentivize better parking behavior or riding, or also you could charge less for if you want to if the providers want to put e-scooters, say at transit stations or at different areas where you want to encourage ridership. Set data reporting standards, and there's a lot of discussions around this right now. So this is continuing to evolve about what the latest data standard is. Continue to build out the bikeway network. It is known that having a good network is going to encourage ridership, improve the safety. Expect parking to be an issue. That is usually, it's the number one complaint that we've heard. And then work closely with regional partners. And one example is a city with a university. It's really important to have, kind of both be on the same page, maybe same providers, just to make sure that the program is cohesive. And so those are the top 8 that we found. And the last thing I want to present on is the APBP micromobility policy. So I'm just going to be really brief on this. APBP is working on a policy statement for micromobility, and so stay tuned, it'll be coming out here soon. It'll provide a position, APBP's position, kind of definition, background, application, key factors in success, and then recommendations. So I'll just go ahead and say what the policy statement is. So APBP supports the development of micromobility. And they view it as a key element of the community's comprehensive transportation system. To ensure an effective, equitable, and sustainable program, communities must take a proactive approach to managing micromobility. So yeah, stay tuned. It was reviewed by the APBP Policy Committee, and it'll go to the APBP Board for approval. That's all I have.
Thanks, Rae-Leigh. So I think we're going to jump right into the cities panel. We're going to go in alphabetical order, so that means Blankenagel is first from the city of Spokane. Hang on just one second though. Before we go there, there's a couple data calls that I did in advance of this, just to give you guys an overview of where these cities stack up in terms of their own fleets and how they're using micromobility. And sorry, you guys can't see this. It has the population, the vehicle types, the number of providers, and the fleet size. And we can always go back to this slide later, but just to give you a sense of, there's different technologies in each of these cities. Some cities only have one provider, others have many, and they're more in the wrangling mode. And the number of actual vehicles per population has quite a bit of variation between these cities as well. And then regulatory aspects of this also vary quite a bit. So Portland, for example, has regulations about allowing e-bikes and scooters in city parks, whereas others limit them in downtown. This just gives you a snapshot. Yeah, feel free to take a photo. That might help as we're going through this this presentation, just to remind yourself where these guys are all at. All right, with that, I'm going to let these cities each share their experience.
All right, so my name is Blankenagel. I'm out of Spokane, Washington. And we launched our formal wheel share program. Micromobility is a little tough for the general public to understand, so wheel share it is. As she just noted, we started off with a pilot in 2018. That ramped up to about 750 vehicles. We started with like 300, and that was a 2.5-month pilot. And then this spring, May 13th was, we kicked off with 750 again, and we're already up to about 1,300 vehicles, 1,300 to 1,400. Most of those being scooters. We've held on to a few e-bikes as part of the fleet, and that's kind of one of the challenges we recognize is that there's this transition, at least for the profitability of riders, to go to the scooters as opposed to maintaining the bikes. And though our citizens want the bikes, one of the parts of our operating requirements as we set forth into our permanent program was to maintain a certain number of bikes on the ground. And based on, and we had to kind of negotiate in terms of how this plays out. If the usage was above one vehicle or one use per day, we would maintain that fleet, and if it was higher than 3 uses per day on the bikes, we would increase that fleet. Right now we're about 1.5 rides per vehicle per day. The scooters sit around 3.5 or 3.7 rides per vehicle per day, and of course that number fluctuates as they inject more more scooters into the system. But it's really been interesting to see where these vehicles are being used. This is actually a 3-month snapshot from this year. The first 3 months of the program just finished up in August. And every single street in the city of Spokane has been ridden on by scooters. This is actually a heat map, so the bigger lines, thicker lines actually mean more rides. And so one of the main points is this route along our river, which is our Centennial Trail. So you can kind of see a really thick and thin usage along that. And also this transition from a neighborhood here into the downtown. There's a strong level of usage and throughout the downtown. So just to give you a snapshot of where the majority of usage is being experienced in Spokane. We definitely have, I think, some relatable issues. You'll probably hear a lot of repetition on this. But riding on the sidewalks is one of our key complaints. Number one complaint from the citizens is those scooters are coming at me really fast on the sidewalk downtown. We actually put in a regulation early this year before we enacted the program that said you cannot ride the scooters on the sidewalk downtown. We go and talk to people that are riding on the sidewalks downtown, they don't believe us. No, there's no way the city would do that. Even as we were drawing or painting these symbols on the sidewalk corners, and we're about halfway through painting these at every corner in the downtown to say, please walk your wheels. One of the things that comes up with that is that it's not just the scooters that are on the sidewalks. It's also people's personal scooters, personal bikes, skateboards, and those are all banned in our downtown on the sidewalk. So when people say, man, that scooter program is the worst thing in the world, we have to point out that it's not just them. So to keep in mind. Definitely people concerned about underage users. We've had to implement some speed zones, some geofencing. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Again, there's this continued voice in favor of having bicycles as part of the program. Parking does continue to be part of the complaints that we have out there as well. So this is just kind of an assessment that we've been doing for the past actually a couple of months now. We're going out and counting the number of people that we're seeing on the sidewalk in our downtown, because this is actually most of the downtown, and this is the zone where you cannot ride them on the sidewalk. What we're finding is that we have bicycles and scooters on the sidewalk, but we also have them in the roadway. So it's almost a 50-50 split that people are complying and not. A little more that are not complying, but again, when we talk about the bikes, these are not e-bikes. These are not part of the shared program. That's actually personal bikes. Most of these scooters on the sidewalk are the shared scooters, but there's a few of those that are not. We're seeing more and more personal-owned e-scooters out there. And so continue to have this discussion outside of saying it's a provider problem. It's really a city issue. So one thing that we've had to implement is event management. We have a couple of big events. One is starting tomorrow, I believe, in the downtown called Pig Out in the Park. But one of them that we had was our Hoop Fest, which shuts down, 40 some odd blocks in our downtown. In fact, you cannot drive in any of those. The streets are basketball courts at that point. And Lime actually worked really closely with us in incorporating a no-scoot zone. Like the scooters just shut down when they came in. It became a very heavy operational lift for Lime because all these scooters went into maintenance mode as they entered the zone, and now they had to cart them away. And so they had this heavy problem that showed up of keeping a balance of those scooters. So it worked really good to bring people into the event, but then how do we balance and the use of that? I think there's more to develop from that, but we certainly learned a lot. One thing that's been really cool is the training opportunities. So our Visit Spokane Bureau has partnered with Line to put on these Scoot Spokane First Ride Academies. So one of the things that we know is a lot of the crashes and injuries that we find are from individuals who just are inexperienced. And so putting them in the park This park actually has a slow speed zone, so they can only go up to 7.5 miles per hour here. We invite them to come and for free try out the scooters, ride them in a no-stress environment and get used to them. And some people that show up for this are really timid to start at first, and then by the end of the hour that they've ridden them, they're just cruising around very comfortably. And that's something that we think is very positive that we've been working on. So really that's all I wanted to share here. Definitely a lot of issues that we try to wrap into just a few minutes here, but we continue to try to make sure that the partnership evolves and we can continue innovating on better ways to have this system work for our citizens.
Great, calling up Alexander Kado from the city of Minneapolis.
Hello everyone, my name is Alexander Kado. I hope I can keep the mic at a good height, I'm kind of tall. Really hard. So thank you all for coming. I'm representing the city of Minneapolis. We've had what we define as micromobility since 2010. So in 2010, we had our bike share system called Nice Ride. You see it here, a pretty picture. First, I have a popular music venue that the artist from Minneapolis, Prince, used to perform at. So our bike share system started off in 2010 with 700 bicycles. We currently have around 3,100 bicycles. Those are dockless, and e-bikes. Our scooter share system started on the day I started with the city. So my first day on the job, I go out to lunch. All my colleagues are interested at these new scooters that have just been placed on our right-of-way. So that was how I started at the city of Minneapolis. With that pilot ended up having 600 scooters. Right now, our pilot has a cap at 2,000. We have about 1,800 scooters on the street. So there's been a lot of scooter challenges, right? I'm sure everyone's seen about it. It's been in the news. There's broken scooters. There's scooters parked in front of doors. People riding on sidewalks, which is illegal in Minneapolis with our scooters. And then if you look over here, you see a few people on a scooter riding on the sidewalk. My favorite scooter illegal activity, I actually saw a gentleman on 2 scooters. So he's like this, 1 scooter on each foot, 1 hand on each throttle, riding down the street. Although very unsafe, I kind of had to laugh at his ability to innovate scooter riding. I thought it was pretty remarkable. But obviously that's not the behavior that we want to see in the city of Minneapolis. It's unsafe. It makes it difficult to promote these type of uses. So we as a city have been working to provide signage, education, information around proper scooter behavior. So we have these signs, no scooter riding on sidewalk. We provided some online information about scooter etiquette. So no riding on sidewalks anywhere, recommending wearing a helmet though not required, riding a bicycle in or with traffic. We're fortunate in Minneapolis, we have a relatively built-up bicycle infrastructure that's helped complement our scooter trip behavior and activity, which I'll talk about in a few slides. Obviously yielding to pedestrians, and then where do you park scooters? I think that's been one of the biggest challenges. It's really nice that they have this flexible system. You can use your phone to find them, but parking them, the behavior hasn't been the best. So we've been providing a few pilots to organize where scooters go. So this is our downtown. If you look at all those police cars, that building to the right is City Hall. To the left is the federal courthouse, so I think that's why there's all those police cars over there. We implemented a 2-way cycle track in downtown, and if you look to the right, we have scooter parking. And if you look further right on the slide over here, that's me going on Facebook at work and seeing that my city posted about the pilot. And here's a picture of the pilot. So we were putting in 30 locations in our downtown core to help organize scooter parking, to provide some wayfinding, some information so folks know where they can physically park their scooters. And it's been very successful, and it's nice that it's near bicycle facilities. With our bike share system, 3,000 bikes. We have dockless, as you can see here on the left. We have docked, and we also have e-bikes. So this year we piloted 50 e-bikes. They go up to, they're a pedal assist up to 18 miles per hour. I rode one a couple weeks ago, and it was pretty amazing actually. I ride bikes a lot, and I was kind of blown away with the experience. It was pretty transformational. So we're piloting those with 50. Next year, so our operator is Lyft motivated. Next year, we're hoping to get 2,000 e-bikes. So generally, we're over time going to replace our pedal-only fleet with e-bikes, assuming that they're able to produce them. I know they're in very high demand all across the country and the world. So this is a map of our bicycle network. I realize it's not very clear, I apologize. We are, through our Transportation Action Plan, which is our 10-year transportation strategy for the city, we are developing in all ages, all areas network, which means that from 8 to 80 years old, we want to provide bicycle facilities that are safe, comfortable, and usable by everyone. And this network, with the lines in blue, shows you the type of bicycle network that we're trying to build out. Currently, we have 133 miles of on-street, unprotected bicycle facilities, so that's bike lanes, bike paths, bike boulevards. We have 105 miles of off-street trails along our park system, our rivers, which are beautiful. And then we have 22 miles of on-street protected facilities. So that's 260 miles of bicycle facilities in Minneapolis. We're doing our 5-year CIP and planning to implement about 15 more miles of bicycle facilities. These would be on-street protected facilities. So we're approaching almost 300 miles of bicycle facilities in Minneapolis. And that volume, that network, has really complemented what we're doing here with the scooters, because there's facilities for these people, for scooter users to safely use and navigate the city. And the data shows the activity we're having. This is an internal dashboard that we've developed with our IT department in coordination with our providers, Line, Lift, and Spin. And you can see we're averaging about 45,000 trips a week, so about 6,500 trips a day. That's about 3.5 trips per scooter. You can see that over the course of the pilot, right here we have almost 500,000 trips. So in 97 days we've had 500,000 trips. So think how many of these trips could potentially have been done in a vehicle that we're potentially removing. I won't get into the nuance of how many car vehicle trips we've saved, but the numbers don't lie. People are using scooters, they're safe. We've had 3 reported crashes this season. 1 is serious but not life-altering crash. So people are using scooters, they're safe, and we have data on where they're using that network that will assist us in our planning methodology when we plan and implement future facilities. Another thing I want to talk about is equity. So with our pilot this year, we required with our operators that they meet certain criteria in terms of where they place bicycles. Only a maximum of 40% can be placed in downtown, and 30% had to be placed in areas of concentrated poverty. Areas of concentrated poverty defined as census tracts where 40% or more of the residents have an income 185% below the federal poverty line, which is for a family of 4, $46,000. So basically, we are putting these scooters in lower income communities because we want them to have the same access to these resources that everybody else has. And another big component with micromobility that I want to touch on is an experience I had with my engagement. I met this gentleman, Vernon Smith, got to spend a few hours with him. Vernon Smith is homeless, disabled, unbanked, has a smartphone, but is not using scooters. He's not using bike share. So all these great new things that we're talking about are very exciting, but there's still a large population that does not have access to these type of exciting new facilities. So we cannot forget them in the equation. Fortunately, the city, Metro Transit has a reduced fare bus program to help supplement him, but there's still a limited amount of options for people like Vernon. So I just want to point that out, that we don't forget those folks that either don't want to ride a scooter or are not physically able to ride a scooter when we think about this. And to conclude, we're capturing new riders. We did a survey last season, surveyed about 1,000 users. 33% of them identified as non-cyclists. I'll say that again, 33% of scooter users identified as non-cyclists. A lot of the infrastructure, the policies were created are trying to keep more people into cycling, and I think scooters, you're seeing 500,000 trips this season, are another way to get people using those same facilities, get them out of single occupancy vehicles. Our existing bicycle network is flexible. Scooters are a great last mile solution. The average trip length is about 1.3 miles, so we're getting those kind of first mile, last mile stops. And also, we need more adaptive mobility modes. I think it's great that there's scooters here that are seated. I've never seen that before, so kudos to Razor and Portland for providing that. And that's it. And you can email me or chat with me if you have further questions. Thank you.
So Seattle, Joel Miller from Seattle, welcome.
Thank you. I'm very scared to stay on time. We were all like, how do we do this in 8 minutes? My name is Joel Miller. I'm the Bike Share Program Manager for the City of Seattle. And we'll hop right into it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of bike share, sort of what we're doing right now, and some of the performance characteristics and where we see this going. Okay, very brief history. Seattle had a dock-based system from 2014 to 2017. It went away for a lot of reasons that I won't get into when I'm on the mic right here. But in spring of 2017, we didn't have bike share. We had nothing, and we were kind of one of the only major cities in the U.S. that didn't have a bike share system. And that was about the same time that this dockless thing was coming over from China, and it was dockless bikes at the time. And so it's serendipitous. We were the only major market without bike share. We said, hey, let's try this new dockless thing. Let's try it really, really quickly. And so we went from the spring just hearing about this to launching our dockless pilot in July of 2017. And we approached that with some certain characteristics. We wanted to use a permit to allow the private vendors to operate in the right-of-way. We wanted to regulate those operations to make sure it was meeting the city's goals. We wanted to collect fees and data to allow this use. And we wanted this to operate at no cost in Seattle. We achieved that. We had a very successful pilot, and we moved in November of last year into this being a permanent program. So we passed legislation through our city council to allow this to stay. So this is what we have now. This year we have 2 vendors operating Jump and Lime, a 3rd vendor, Lyft. It was permitted and has yet to launch. We can get into those details, but it had to do with the availability of their bikes. We wanted a large fleet. We permitted up to 20,000 bikes. We had about 10 to 12,000 pilot, 10 to 12,000, what do we call analog bikes now, not e-bikes. The market shifted to e-bikes. They're much more expensive, and then obviously one of the vendors wasn't able to launch. So this year we have about 5,000 to 7,000 bikes. And we're seeing good usage of that. We'd like to see more. And the big thing with wanting more bikes is we wanted this to be a reliable system in all of the city. Whether you're downtown or getting off the light rail at the edges of the town, you might have a bike there. You would have a bike there to get you to your destination in that last mile. So all the bikes this year are e-assist, and then scooters. We just announced recently that we are starting our outreach process. We'll be working with key stakeholders through the next couple months to really work with the community on not just, hey, like, should we allow scooters or not, or kind of working with the minutia of the permit, but really working with them on what are the goals, what kind of scope and scale of a scooter pilot what should that look like, so that when we do launch, we know that we've heard from the people, they've had a say in how scooters should launch in Seattle. And in the end, I think get a really, really successful permit underway. So some other permit characteristics. We wanted to make sure that bike share was an equitable system. This heat map on the right shows the white line is where our dock-based system covered, and the darker areas are where there were a lot of bikes in our pilot. So immediately we saw this covering the whole city. We were really excited about that. And kind of in that southeast quadrant of the city, that's an area that we do have a lot of low-income population, a high percentage of people of color, and we were happy to see bikes getting used a lot there. But we knew that wasn't enough. Availability was only sort of part of the equation. We wanted to have low-income programs that people could afford this. Jump offered $5 per month for 60 minutes a day low-income program. Lime offers 50% off. We wanted to lower barriers to access. Do you need to have a bank account? Do you need to have a smartphone? Jump now uses essentially their Uber Cash that you can get at Target and things like that, and text to unlock. Lime partners with Pay Near Me. You can like 5 minutes at 7-Eleven and text to unlock. And then we also required citywide coverage. We're doing ongoing outreach efforts. We require the companies to do some outreach as well. And then I wrote metrics ? And that's kind of an area where I think we didn't get it quite right, and that we didn't require the companies to give us that like low income usage percentage. That's something that I think cities should do. That's something that we'll work with the companies to get us this year, that they're generally willing to do things like that. And it's something we talk about next year in our requirements. We also wanted to make sure that there was an adaptive component, that bike share didn't just serve people that were able to ride a traditional bike. We are really, really fortunate in Seattle that we had an existing 501c3 named Outdoors for All that focuses on adaptive sports. They have one of the largest adaptive cycle fleets in the US. And they're located in a big, big park on one of our main multi-use trails, Berkeley Trail. And so we were able to take a portion of those permit fees and fund for them more of their adaptive cycle rentals. We made it free with that partnership for anyone to come and rent an adaptive bike. They're now open 7 days a week through the summer, and they're attending 10 events in the south end. Magnuson Park is in the north end of the city, and so they're going to 10 events at the south end with a bunch of their bikes and having free rentals there as well. It's been extremely successful so far. We've had 241 unique riders. I got this data yesterday, doing 571 rides. That's already, and we still have a couple more months to go, 150 to 250% growth over what they were doing last year without the stock partnership. So we're really seeing how we can leverage bike share to allow more people to experience enjoying cycling. One other thing that we really wanted to do as we moved from the pilot to the ongoing permit was focus on building more places to put these bikes. And we really looked at, hey, we could do something that didn't have racks and would be maybe quicker and a little cheaper to do that. We thought, hey, let's make this work for all cyclists in the city, and let's add bike parking for everybody. And then no matter kind of what happens with scooters, with dockless bikes, or maybe Lock 2 bikes, we're kind of taking care of. So we're building this year roughly about 100, 150 new corrals. That's doubling the amount of corrals the city had to start. And most of those we're putting in the street where we don't have like a curb lane for parking, putting them where we have a big wide furniture zone on the sidewalks. Focusing those near transit, high use areas, and then if we're just seeing a large neighborhood without any bike parking, we're looking to add some there as well. We are auditing how the bikes are parked, and this is kind of the biggest snag in the program right now. We have a team, 1 or 2 people, me for a bit, out on the streets, and you just kind of judge how every bike that you come across is parked in like an area. So you draw out an area, you walk every street, you judge every bike. And we're seeing about 2% of the bikes this year are violating the ADA and not leaving 4 feet of clear pedestrian crossings. 10 to 20% are obstruction hazards as we define them. And that's a definition that's based on a lot of outreach with people with disabilities. So whether you're in a wheelchair or blind using a cane, these are bikes that can be a major problem. And then 25 to 30% are improperly parked in some way. That difference between obstruction hazard and properly parked is mostly on an unpaved surface. And so it's something that we're less concerned about, but it's not technically correct. Bike maintenance has been pretty good. We're just really doing more to audit bike maintenance, but we've started it and we're seeing that most bikes are in good working condition. And we are still seeing a lot of people using this. So we've had almost 900,000 rides this year so far. That matches about what we saw in the pilot. But remember, the pilot had 10 to 12,000 bikes, and they were also much cheaper to rent. They were usually $1 to unlock, 5 cents a minute. One of the companies, OFO, actually didn't charge for a good chunk of this time last year. And so this year, with more expensive bikes and far fewer of them, we're seeing about the same ridership. So we're excited where this can go as we keep growing the system. We're also collecting the data in-house. This is just a little screen grab from our Tableau dashboard showing trip destinations, and we're seeing this used across the city. So with that, contact me if you have any questions, and I think I stayed under 8 minutes.
Hi everybody, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. My name's Briana, and I've been managing our e-scooter pilots since we first ran the one in 2018. So we have had 2, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge I'm one person on a very large team. So if you're working on the e-scooter pilot or you consulted with us, can you just stand up, please? I just wanted to chat a little bit about how we set up our pilot, and I'll start by saying it's fitting that I call it Toole because we learned a lot from Seattle, and we continue to learn a lot from other cities that are we also grounded it in our goals. Also want to talk about our internal collaboration and where we got data. I'll talk a little bit about our 2018 pilot, which I think maybe you've already heard about, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I'll give you a little bit of insight from what we're learning since the last 3 months that we've been running our 2019 pilot. And then kind of what does this all mean for us? So PBOT just had a refresh of our strategic goals, and so really looking at 3 key ways to move forward. Managing our assets, ensuring safety, and moving people. And so the e-scooter pilot really falls squarely in this safety and moving people categories. That's influencing a lot of the work that we're doing. And then as part of our strategic plan, we're also asking 2 key questions of everything that we do, which is this advancing racial equity? And is this advancing climate change policy and meeting our carbon emission goals? And so we really built that into the pilot goals specifically. So I'm sure that if you were looking at this, or maybe you've already looked at e-scooters, you would come up with similar things. Can this increase your share of trips from non-polluting modes? Is this going to help you reach Vision Zero? Does this help you pedestrian safety, accessibility? How can we provide equitable transportation services? And are we actually reducing air pollution with this? And I get a lot of questions around how many people are involved, which groups are involved in PBOT. So I just wanted to provide, this is everybody who's been involved in some way. So myself, I work for our Active Transportation and Safety Group. My colleague Tim Moore, who's here, is in our regulatory division. Jacob Sherman is from our New Mobility group, and many other groups, including communications, technology, and our director and commissioner's office. Very, very involved in this pilot. So just a little bit about what we learned last year. Data is foundational. We received company-provided data, availability, trip, collision, as well as complaints. We also received, we went out and did parking and riding observations, similar to how Joel explained. Really in the first pilot, these were true observations. We weren't, we were just trying to understand what the breadth of the problem really was. We also put out a user survey, public opinion poll. We worked with our Multnomah County Health Department to understand how many injury visits are happening to ER and urgent care rooms. We held focus groups and asked the community for feedback. So we have a 32-page document, which I have some here if you want to take a look at it. I tried to condense that into 3 slides. So here's what we learned. Most people are using e-scooters for transportation. A good portion of those folks would have driven a car or taken an Uber or Lyft if the e-scooter hadn't been available. 44% of users were new to the bike lane. So similar to what Alex said in Minneapolis, that these were really not people that were using our bike share system, and really not people who were biking on a regular basis. Overall, in that public opinion poll that we ran, 62% of Portlanders were favorable about the pilot. So that's unfortunately not the people who called me every day during the pilot, but most people did like it. And that was higher, more positive amongst people of color and more positive amongst people of low incomes, which I thought was really important. And then overall, this isn't surprising, but users prefer low-speed streets and they prefer riding on bike lanes. So we had certainly had challenges. Sidewalk riding was also our #1 complaint. Improper parking. Surprisingly, we didn't get very many complaints about this, but it was really the nature of the complaint coming from people with disabilities primarily, and especially people with vision impairments. We didn't see great performance in meeting our equity goals in that first pilot, fairly low ridership in those equity areas. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we kind of had some question marks, or like not really sure if it's a plus or minus. So, I mean, no injuries are a plus, but it's really hard to compare this injury rate, 2.2 per 10,000 trips, against what we know happening with cars or bikes or people walking even. We have a very precise information around how many trips were taken in the pilot. We have no idea how many trips are taken by bike, how many trips are taken by walking, so it's really hard to compare. We also, while we saw really positive, environmental impacts if we're just considering user ridership and displacing the car, and now we're trying to think about operations as well. So what does it take to run a scooter system, and how many cars are added to the road just moving and picking up scooters? Here's what we heard after that pilot, after this report came out. We did a online open house. We heard the number one thing from folks was they felt like there wasn't any enforcement of the rules. And this is enforcement for users, not necessarily company compliance. So they wanted us to focus on sidewalk riding and illegal parking. They wanted more education. We heard this especially amongst our focus group that we hosted with Black Portlanders. They felt like no one came out and shared how to really use the scooter. Dedicated parking, and then more access to scooters in the city. And yeah, we heard from folks with disabilities, they wanted a more accessible scooter. So we wrote into our permit that we wanted to see seated scooters in this next pilot. Here's some things that we did, that we changed. I probably won't go into these because I'm running out of time. But we did a lot of things that folks asked for. And I wanted to just take a moment to focus on incentives. So we have, when you think about regulating a new mobility, you have lots of tools in your toolbox. So this is one that we're trying out, which is essentially we're dangling a carrot in front of companies to say, hey, if you meet some of our goals, we will give you an increased fleet size. Increased fleet size is more market share. And so we're applying this for the first time and had a pretty good experience doing it, and be happy to talk more after. So here's what we're learning in the last couple months. We have 6 permitted companies. We also see about 30 to 50,000 trips per week. So that's the black line is weekly trips, and the other lines are around customer service reports that are coming in, rider behavior reports, so complaints around rider behavior and other things. So compared to the trips, those things are fairly low. This is where at least 25 trips have started in the city of Portland, so fairly concentrated in the central city. We have a required equity deployment area, which is all those blue dots in the east side of 205. But if you look at where at least one trip has started, you see that there is demand for e-scooters across the city. And so, with the 2,000 scooters, 2,600 scooters that we have right now, we're not meeting that demand. And scooters aren't really reliable across the city, I think is what it seems to. We are seeing some really interesting things coming out of the data that helps us understand if our efforts are being successful. So we still have an issue of e-scooters aren't allowed on Portland Park trails. So I'm sure you've all have experienced the Greenway if you're not from Portland. It's along the waterfront, really lovely place that you want to ride a scooter. But we've seen a drop in e-scooter ridership along that Greenway trail in favor of Better Nato, which is a two-way cycle track along Nato Parkway. And I think in part because Better Nato wasn't open for the entire pilot last year, and it has been open this year. We've also done a number of geofencing requirements with companies that I think are starting to help with that as well. And then I just want to take a second to kind of ask, what does this all mean? We're starting to put these data sets together. I think I really stole this idea from NACTO when they put out their report. Here's our ride-town system and trips that we've seen just from the last year, starting in April 2018. And I put up in 2018 in May, we did a free ride promotion. Anybody could ride by town for free. We saw a huge jump in ridership that May. And then you see kind of a natural seasonal wave throughout the winter. And this is what we've seen with e-scooters. So this is really additive on top of what we continue to have with bike share. So we had that almost 4-month pilot last year, starting into the 2019 pilot. And I think my takeaway from this is that it might be stealing a few trips here and there from Biketown, but I think overall we're adding to micromobility options and active transportation options in Portland. I'm sure I'm running out of time, so but I just wanted to put up, I think, a few of my pieces of learning from this. I would encourage you to pilot and iterate. Don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to fail. Know that you can try again and do better. Collaborate internally and externally. I think especially if you're from a smaller city, see what partners that you have outside the city who can help do some of the data analysis and meet those goals. Set goals, set your performance criteria, require that companies provide you data. I think this is really foundational to understand how the pilot's going, are you meeting goals, and I think it's really important to understand where we're headed with micromobility in general. Taking a step back and look at the big picture, know that this isn't always competition, and trying to make sure that we're understanding if we're meeting our bigger picture goals. And please encourage you to share whatever you're learning. I think we are, while maybe sometimes experts in the field, we're only in this a year or 2 or 5. So you're going to learn something that we don't know, and let's continue to share that. So thank you so much.
All right, Jamie Parks from San Francisco is going to bring us home with this panel. Jamie.
Thank you. So Jamie Parks with the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. And generally, I oversee our bicycle and pedestrian programs, so most of my work is on capital projects, but bike share and scooter share are also part of my team, and so it's something that I've been working quite a bit on over the last couple of years. So I want to start by providing 2 pieces of context that I think are important to understand our approach in San Francisco. And the first, I think, will come as no surprise to anybody in this room, but San Francisco, the Bay Area generally, is the tech capital of the world. Uber, Lyft, Salesforce, Twitter, all headquartered in downtown San Francisco. And so when you look at where bike share and scooter startups occur, a lot of them are in San Francisco. The venture capital that funds them is coming from San Francisco. And it's a very prestigious market and a very lucrative and kind of sought after market for any of these companies. The second point is that in addition to being the center of the tech world, probably as a result of that, I think San Francisco is maybe the center of the tech resistance, and there's a lot of skepticism among the population about the changes in San Francisco, and a lot of that plays itself out in terms of, I think front and center is the effect of the tech industry on gentrification, on affordable housing, but transportation is a major piece of this conversation as well, and so whether that's commuter bus shuttle protests, or it's burning bike share vehicles in our streets, or even my personal favorite is using a burning pile of scooters to block a commuter shuttle. A little bit of a grainy photo there, but that's what that is. It's a burning pile of scooters blocking a commuter shuttle from taking workers to Silicon Valley. And so that kind of tension that we face between being an innovation hub who's also deeply skeptical of innovation has been really front and center to how we've tried to approach scooters and bike share, and kind of threading that needle has been a real challenge that we're hopefully getting closer and closer to hitting the right mark on. So before getting into some of the details, I want to go over a little bit of the history of dockless mobility in San Francisco. Because of kind of San Francisco's position in kind of the tech world, I believe we were the first city in the country to have a dockless bike share system launch, or attempt to launch, which was Blue Go-Go in January 2017. We were one of the first cities to have scooters launch in the spring of 2018. And so we've been kind of at the forefront of trying to figure out what this means. And I think something that all the city speakers have mentioned is learning from other cities. And so there wasn't really a playbook for us to go from. And so phone calls to Seattle and Portland and other cities have been really important to us as we've tried to figure out what we're doing. So I'm going to talk specifically about our experience with scooters, and I'm going to leave bike share out of this presentation, partially because there's a limited amount of time and I can't cover all of it, and partially because there's pending litigation with our bike share system that makes it kind of challenging to talk about in this setting. So I'll talk about scooters where we are not yet in litigation with anybody. So start with scooters. They, similar to many other cities in the country, scooter companies showed up in the spring of 2018. And launched without any permission from the city, but also it was not illegal. It turned out that there was nothing in our city code that prohibited scooters from being launched. And, a couple things were learned during this first couple months. One is that, there was obvious demand for scooters. When you put scooters on the street, people ride them, and so that was pretty cool. But we also observed a lot of unsafe behavior, which people have already talked about, particularly around blocking the pedestrian right-of-way and illegal sidewalk riding. We received thousands of complaints, and I would say that our elected officials, erupted in rage and kind of lost their collective minds over the launch of this system. And so it was front page news on the Chronicle for multiple weeks in a row, and we ultimately so we hurried around and did what we do as bureaucrats, we passed some legislation and we passed a whole slew of regulations to try to figure out, how scooters could operate in San Francisco. And so that legislation resulted in a 12-month pilot that ends this October. Our key, there's a lot of things that went into the regulations there, but the three key principles that we kept returning to try to figure out what we would include were safety, equity, and accountability. And so we needed the system to be safe, we needed to serve all San Franciscans, and we needed the companies to be accountable to us. And there's a lot of things that go into each of those, but we repeated those three words over and over again as we developed the program. Ultimately, we ended up with 2 permittees for the pilot. Skip and Scoot. They were limited to 625 scooters each for the first 6 months, and there's potential doubling after 6 months, depending on what we found from the first 6 months. And similar to Portland, actually, we mostly copied the Portland evaluation, so I'm not going to go into the details of what we found, but we did copy the framework that Portland used for our evaluation and used very similar metrics around how the scooters were used, the safety, equity, and community engagement, and also, how many complaints and citations we received. Our current status is the pilot's ending. We passed legislation to extend it as a permanent program. On the right, there are a couple key findings from the evaluation. Probably the most important one that I point to, similar to the other speakers, is our survey found that 42% of our scooter trips were replacing auto trips. And we talk a lot about all the issues and problems and challenges with scooters, but that 42% number is what keeps us coming back and keeps us going and makes us feel like this program is worth investing in. I think probably the most unique thing about our approach to dockless mobility in San Francisco is a requirement for, and I'll skip to a picture here, but the requirement for locking mechanisms, or lock tube devices. And so all of our scooters, all of our dockless bikes require locking, and that's something that we feel really strongly about for protecting the public right-of-way. San Francisco is the second densest city in the country. The densest, New York, doesn't really have dockless mobility for a lot of these reasons. And so from a sidewalk clutter standpoint, we've found that it's really important to have that locking mechanism, and so that's a requirement going forward. So I want to end by just highlighting a few lessons that we have learned through this that hopefully are valuable for other cities as well. So the first one is asking for more. And so, there's a lot of money behind these companies, and the public right-of-way is really valuable, and we need to extract value from the companies when we are issuing permits. And so whether that's requiring the locking mechanisms, requiring data sharing, or any of the other 89 terms and conditions that we have in our permit, we've continually raised the bar and asked for more, and every time we do that, the companies come back and say, yes, we would love to operate in San Francisco, and we've just got 11 applications, and so we have not yet hit the limit of what we can ask for, and so I encourage you to continue to ask. Second lesson is that operations are very hard and difficult. It's easy to purchase scooters. It's very hard to operate a system that's reliable and serves the whole city. Whether it's theft and vandalism, 2/3 of the scooters from Toole were stolen in the first 2 weeks of their operations, rebalancing. All of these things are very challenging. I think the companies are still learning a lot. And if we want these programs to actually be reliable, somebody can step out their door in the morning and be sure that the scooter will exist and be in working order, we need to be a lot better at operations, which is going to cost a lot of money. Third lesson is defining the public engagement roles. I think this is something that we're still working on. Ultimately, the companies are responsible for their actions and what happens, but we as the agencies are accountable. People call us, it's our public right-of-way, and we've been getting, I think, more involved than we wanted to initially in the community engagement pieces of this, and more prescriptive on what types of outreach needs to be done. That wasn't something we set out to do, but as time goes on, we're taking on a larger and larger role there. I'm not sure if that's appropriate or not, but that's kind of the trend we're in. And the last one, I don't really even have a picture or anything for this. I thought about putting a picture of a stack of paper or something up here, but anyway, you can't possibly underestimate the amount of staff time, or you can't possibly overestimate the amount of staff time that these programs take. We have 11 applications. Each application needs to be scored on 60 separate evaluation criteria. Each criteria needs to be scored by at least 2 different raters. That's 1,550 separate ratings that need to be produced in the next 2 weeks. 5 minutes per rating. I don't know, it's like $50,000 of work just to create the evaluation matrix for these applications, let alone anything else that goes into the program. So the staff time it's incredibly intensive, and it's just a lot of work. Hopefully, we find out that it's worthwhile in a couple of years, and these programs are serving public value. So that's what I had to share. I think San Francisco's been kind of at the forefront of this, and it's been a unique challenge to try to figure out how we can regulate these systems in a way that allows innovation to happen, but also preserves public value and safety and equity. And so we're getting closer and closer, I think, every time we take another shot at this. Thank you.
And I'm going to load up some of the questions I've got for the cities here. We've heard a lot from about how things are going from like the kind of Love Fest side to San Francisco. And I think that to get into some of those nuances and hear from others and what we haven't heard about. So let's see. There's so many good questions. How about infrastructure? How has micromobility impacted your city's decision-making about transportation infrastructure, or has it yet? Who wants to take that first?
I can start with that. And I'll just talk specifically about bike racks. I mentioned that we are requiring scooters and dockless bike share to walk to racks. That's great. Now we need more racks. And so we've got about 10,000 racks in the city right now, and we figure that we need to find a way to double that in the next several years. And so that's been incredibly challenging, so we're working on a plan to do that. But anyway, our approach to bike racks and bike parking has certainly changed as a result of these programs, and hopefully for the better. I think as Joel pointed out, these racks are going to be publicly accessible to anybody using any bicycle, and so I think it's a great benefit. And we have fees built into our programs where we should be getting several $100,000 this year for bike rack installation from our permitting fees, which will help to install racks that benefit everyone.
Thank you. How about bike lanes and paths and things like that? Who can speak to that? Bridge or space?
I can speak to that just for a minute. I don't think that we have fully integrated that thinking into our planning for streets yet, but those conversations are starting to come up, and I think a real key part of that is having the data available. So the fact that we have essentially scooter traffic volumes across our city, I can share that with our transportation planners and say, look, you're gonna do a new streetscape on one that's coming up as Hawthorne, Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard. A lot of tourism on Hawthorne Boulevard. Look how many scooter trips are on Hawthorne Boulevard. If we don't build a bike lane, where are they gonna go? They're gonna be on the sidewalk. And so I think that's the conversation and the trade-off that we need to start having, and the data really helps inform that.
It's a great segue into another question about data. So we heard some great figures that show that scooters might be reaching a new segment of the population that's not using bikes, and that's very encouraging. What are you finding the data is telling you from those we haven't heard from on that, and what are the gaps, the data gaps that you're looking to fill over the next few years?
I can start. We don't have scooters, so this is more from a bike share side, but just talking about the difficulties of data and the data gaps. I think most of the cities here are requiring the vendors to report their data and the mobility data specifications. That's a new feed that cities are working on. And it seems like it would be a simple thing to figure out, like say, how many bikes are on the street or how many scooters. And when you're working with multiple vendors, and those vendors are working with multiple cities, and trying to say, okay, hey, what's that definition? Is that every bike that's on the street? Is it the bikes that are available for rental? Is it the bikes that are available for rental plus the ones that are rented? There's needs to be clarity in that definition. And then once you get that clarity, it's how do you count that? Well, the data specification has this field called status change. And the status change has things like the bike's been rented, the bike's been, like the ride has ended, it's been removed for maintenance, the battery's been swapped, things like that. What pieces of those data do you use to say, okay, is this bike count or not? And I think all of that, just the larger, the deeper and deeper you go, kind of the larger and larger the hole gets. And I think that's something that cities and all of us are working really hard on, but it'll be a struggle. And it's going to continue to be a struggle probably for the next year or two. So as you guys and other cities are looking at starting this, I think approaching it with both, hey, this is going to be hard, it's going to take a lot of manpower, and for a bit we might not have the answers we want. I think that's important.
So I'd like to take a moment on that as well, and from the more simplified version of data management and at a simpler level, with one vendor we can actually manage that data a little easier in Spokane. But one of the things that the data actually tells us, and it kind of wraps up all three of those questions, is where the people are riding and where the demand is for more infrastructure. So that's one of the things that we've noticed is actually very positive from this, is being able to say, well, you've got 250 trips per day on the street that you're saying nobody rides on. And so there's a great argument to be made with the data.
Okay, I've got a question from Minneapolis, because we haven't heard from you on this round. So you had quite a bit of data showing how your scooters were contributing to both, ride share or mode share as well as CO2 reductions. So are you incorporating these new modes into your long-term transportation planning and your mode shift goals, things like that?
Yeah, so it's a fortunate timing in that we are currently drafting our 10-year transportation plan with the scooters in mind, and we are definitely incorporating those impacts. We have a component of our transportation action plan called the advanced mobility section, and that's going to include strategies on autonomous vehicles, shared mobility, as well as the low-power vehicles is what we're labeling scooters in our plan. And we are rethinking our mode share goals and starting to think about how do we incorporate scooters into those. I think one of the biggest challenges is we are not sure what technology will be here next year. We're working with the providers and we enjoy these scooters, but is there going to be hoverboards next year? We're not sure. I think really what it is that we're redefining our bicycle infrastructure as bicycle and low-power vehicles, and just thinking about how to incorporate that technology into our infrastructure and ultimately into our goals. Our bike share is at about 4% right now, and it's been relatively stagnant. But with the scooters, we're hoping, and other e-bikes, etc., that it will increase our mode share. We'll have to reset our targets, so yes.
Great, okay. Last question. So those of you that have adopted different approaches, some of you partner intentionally with providers, others of you invite groups of them into the market and take a more managerial approach of just wrangling, I guess is the best word for it. So those of you that have made intentional partnerships, do you see yourself continuing in that vein, and how is that working for you?
So in Spokane, we're definitely partnered, where we only have one provider, and it really is a nice setup where we can actually say, hey, let's work on, for instance, that First Ride Academy. We don't have to say, all right, you get this First Ride Academy, and the next one is operated by somebody else. We don't have to kind of share the market around, and plus where there's not competition for different areas, we can focus attention on various aspects of our system and say, hey, we need some attention here, and whether that's an equity push into a lower income neighborhood or whatever it is, it's a partnership, we're one-on-one. And we actually did sign our contract for 2 years, but it's renewable up for twice, so they could potentially have 6 years of market share as long as we're continuing to agree and innovate together.
Okay, and then maybe Briana can speak to how the other model's working and the benefits and drawbacks. The incentives you mentioned about market share were interesting because that can encourage better behavior. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the incentives maybe are our first step into potentially a more partnership model. I mean, I think that knowing very little about e-scooters and if they met our goals last year, I think there really wasn't a place for us to go to partnership immediately. I think the community was really asking us to take a cautious approach to e-scooters. And I hope that with the evaluation of this pilot that we're in right now, we can say a little bit more definitively, yes or no, are e-scooters a good thing for Portland? And if it's yes, then I think, maybe a partnership model is somewhere that we want to go. If it's maybe, then maybe it's continuing in the realm that we're in more of this regulation. I do think that the companies have a lot to offer in terms of right now with the incentives, one of the things that we've been incenting them to do is safety workshops. So asking them to go out in the community, build partnerships with nonprofit organizations, and host safety workshops. Teach people how to ride safely. Teach people what the laws are. This is something that, similar to Seattle, we're not supposed to be spending money on the pilot, and so as city staff, we're apprehensive to go out and offer some of those services, but that doesn't mean that they're not needed. It's a huge gap just in terms of what the public needs from something like this. So that has at least shown a really great place for us to provide that reward for companies that are willing to go out and do that extra effort.
Great, okay. I'm going to let you guys off the hook for the moment, and we're going to bring up the providers, and Rae-Leigh is the moderator for that panel.
All right, so we have three providers with us today, representing three different companies. We have Brask from Jump, Cheng from Spin, and Gabriel Scheer from Lime. And we're going to start with Gabriel Scheer from Lime.
Right, so I want to talk just a little bit about our journey, kind of where Lime has been, where we are now, and touch a little bit specifically on the equity access side of things, as well as on the sustainability piece, and hopefully get to touch some of the things that the city folks before us talked about a bit. To start, this is our purpose. Fundamentally, we want to change how people think about cities and how they think about getting around in those cities. And I'm going to touch on the numbers in just a second. I'll touch on them a couple times because I think the tension that was talked about in the last panel, some of the learning curve stuff that's happened is represented in those numbers and in this attempt to reimagine how we think about cities. So I started at Lime in February of 2017. We started as a company in January of 2017. So if you think about that, this is 2019. And in that time, we've gone from 0 dots on any map anywhere to that, which to me is mind-blowing. And Briana spoke a little bit about the speed and a test here and learn about that there. And if you look at these cities, all of these cities had no thing like we are now 2.5 years ago. By which I mean scooters, by which I mean the scale that these companies have grown. Ours kind of at the forefront of some of the growth. But to me, it's mind-boggling. And so the discomfort that cities have felt, and that we have felt, and that riders have felt, and that everybody has felt, I think is a very natural thing. Because this has gone really, really fast. And scale has happened at a speed that has not really happened. And I would say that even comparing against Uber and Lyft, who scaled very, very quickly, but they did so in a way that you didn't see. They used existing infrastructure. They were cars just like any other car. And suddenly they were omnipresent in cities in a growth curve that looked kind of like this. Only what we've done is put these things in the public right-of-way in cities all over the place. And that is change happening really fast. On the other hand, climate change came up briefly in the last panel. IPCC says we've got like 11 and some change years left. So I would argue that this isn't fast enough in a lot of ways. The change that's happening is going to be jarring and disruptive and hard. And this is what, to me, just kind of continually I come back to because it blows my mind to think about how fast this has gone and yet how much more there is to do. So talking a little bit about us. January 2017, we started. Our first bike looked like that. That really didn't see the streets anywhere, those beautiful wheels. It didn't actually roll anywhere. The bike actually had normal spokes by the time it hit the streets. Seattle was our 4th market anywhere in the world to launch. The first 3 were much smaller places: Key Biscayne, Florida, South Bend, Indiana, and the other one that I'm totally spacing on right now. University of North Carolina, Greensboro. I'm sorry, first place. I'm sorry if you're out there, UNCG. But Seattle was our first really big place to go. And for the reason that Joel already listed, right? It was a city that suddenly had no bike share at all. It was a city that is inclined towards bike despite its topography and other things. And we really wanted to kind of prove that we could do this thing. So we poured a lot of energy into that first 6 months to a year in Seattle. and frankly still do. It was also the first major deployment of e-bikes for us, and we now operate a fleet there of, I don't know, 4,000, or I'm not sure what the number is, but a bunch of them. So there are lots and lots of learning curves. I'm working really closely with the city, and when we messed up, going to the city and trying to figure out, like, what did we mess up? And the city coming to us and saying, hey, we're not sure what's going on with this. Data sharing. When we first started, our first data share with the city of Seattle was a CSV file. Here are the trips. Go make sense of them. And both the city and us were like, we're doing this. We want to share data. We want you to use the data. And I remember getting a call from one of the folks at the city about 3 weeks after we launched saying, hey, we're doing some planning for a specific road and looking at bike ped stuff. And you guys haven't even started sharing data yet because none of us are set up to do this yet, but would you share what we're doing on this specific area so that we can inform this policy? And it's really awesome because already we were seeing change happen. Scooters, first fleet really launched in January of last year. So if you think again about scooters, and this whole conversation has largely centered on scooters as a piece of micromobility, our first ones hit the streets in January of last year. So it's only a year and a half plus a little bit that this has been going. The vast majority of our fleet now globally is scooters. And that speaks to the adoption curve, which to me is kind of the biggest piece of this. And I think it was Jamie from San Francisco said, when you put them on the streets, there was suddenly demand. And to me, this is something as a bicycle person that I hadn't anticipated, but we see it everywhere we go. Big smiles and a ridership immediately. The last one there is the Lime Pod. We launched the first fleet of shared cars in Seattle in October of last year. We're running our own internal purposes one-year pilot. And by saying internal, I mean we don't know if we can do this, we don't know how it's going to work, we don't know adoption, all these things, but we want to try it out. And I think that's been a key to our company continually is figuring out like what else can we add to get people to move away from single occupant and privately owned cars as the main form of transportation. So we've got a fleet of about 500 pods in Seattle. They are a Fiat 500 currently. We wanted to launch with EVs, but we didn't have the speed. The speed with which we were trying to launch was not such that we could get the EV we wanted homologized and ready to go in this country fast enough to actually launch it. So we launched in October. The team built the service starting in July, so that gives you a little sense of our window. We started building in July, we launched in October, and now we've been running, I guess, 10 months. So getting close to the end of our internal window to think about, sort of look at the numbers over the last year. Did this help? Did it move the needle? Did it get people out of cars, more people? And looking at the numbers so far, it's encouraging. Specifically, we're seeing some people who hadn't ridden any of our bikes before try this, and conversely, some people who had been riding our bikes switched over and are using this as well. And when we've done some internal surveying, a lot of them are saying, yeah, I can now do trip chaining. So instead of having to do, for example, a car to drive me downtown, I can grab a car that drives me partway, then I grab a bike and leave the car. So it's enabling a different lifestyle choice for a lot of folks. I want to talk a little about the impact again, and again, I'll touch on the 100 cities piece of things, but again, a company now 2.5 years old, we're over 100 different cities, over 5 continents, 25 countries, 65 million trips, which to me is just a mind-boggling number, and each city was talking about this many per month and whatever. You roll those up, and this number is probably probably over a month old. So you can do the math, like the numbers are just mind-boggling. And that ties to carbon emissions. And we're looking at some of the same questions that Briana talked about in terms of life cycle. What is the impact this is having? I'll speak a little bit to that in a moment. We made a decision last fall to go carbon neutral, and that's obviously not a totally true statement because we operate vehicles all over the place. What we did, however, is we are purchasing carbon offsets to do 100% of our fleet under renewable. We've also done some development now, supporting developments of a wind farm in France and a solar farm, vice versa, a solar farm in France, a wind farm in Iowa. So working on getting localized power production supported. So at first it was just the offsets, now it's actually helping develop some of the renewable energy that we need in our portfolio. And it's something that we're continuing to look at. How do we work with, for example, the juicers, which is what we call the people who go out and charge our scooters. How do we identify, first of all, what they're even using for a vehicle, because they're independent people, we don't know necessarily. And then second, how do we encourage them or help them to get access to or think differently about the vehicles they're using to do that charging. So big piece of how we're thinking about things. We're also thinking a lot about the transit connection, and I think it was Alexander from Minneapolis who said that they were seeing a lot of sort of 1.5 mile-ish trips. We're seeing that across our whole fleet, a lot of connection to transit, and approximately a mile is an average trip in cities all over the place. So we've partnered with Google. If you open your Google Maps app, you can see not only bus choices, Uber and Lyft choices, but also line choices. And our goal with that is to start showing people this comparison, numbers, time, all that kind of thing, to enable people to think differently about this. Because ultimately, a lot of this comes down to people changing behavior. That's true about good parking. That's true about what mode I choose on a given day when I leave my house in the morning. All of this comes down to behavior. So how can we make it as visible as possible that this is a thing you could do that might not be what you've always done? So we speak a lot to that. We think a lot as well about the health impacts, and one of the pieces of that is, are we omnipresent in the city? I think that unfettered, we would have a lot more vehicles in any given city, and we would try to really spread out across those cities. Fettered somewhat by a box. The box says you can have X number of vehicles. How do we make sure we maximize that number of vehicles' availability to people? And Briana said that as well. You see the trip starts all over the city. If you have more vehicles, you'll probably have more trip starts. There are some areas that are going to be hotter than others, some areas that will be less so. So how do we really try to spread the benefits across the city in terms of reduced uses of cars, more healthy lifestyle choices, all sorts of things? And then equity. I'm really excited about this. We launched our sort of equity pricing and access program about a year and a half ago, I think, called Lime Access. And it was a partnership with Pay Near Me, which Joel mentioned earlier. You can go into a 7-Eleven and buy minutes. Pay Near Me is a national provider in which you go into a 7-Eleven or a Family Dollar or CVS, a number of other brick and mortar places. You give them cash, and effectively they create a digital bank account for you. That ties to a variety of services, not just Lime. You can, in some cities, pay your various utility bills and other things that way. But the thing that's really cool about it is you can be an unbanked person and still have access to what is effectively a credit card-based system by using Pay Near Me. The second piece is the non-smartphone unlock access or option that Access provides, which is you call one of our numbers. We have a specific number for it that you get when you sign up for the program, and then you can unlock our vehicles and you get 50% off of any of our vehicles anywhere. Another thing we focus heavily on is trying to educate and engage with communities all across the sort of cities in which we operate. So here we've done a lot of outreach with a particular community, working with communities of color across Portland, trying to really make sure we are getting out into the neighborhoods and engaging with people through sort of the channels that they're already in, the groups of people with whom they already associate. And then hiring too, we've hired, I think very intentionally across a lot of our cities, in some places hiring from the formerly incarcerated community, in other places former military. So we've really tried to reflect the communities we're in and to hire people for whom this could be a great, we hope, on-ramp into a longer term life with us, working with us. So with that, I will wrap up and simply say, I think, again, this is challenging. What we're doing is dramatic change. It's disruptive. Capital D, little d, doesn't matter. It's changing how we think about how we move around cities. It's changing how we think about the right-of-way. I would suggest that even some of the things we saw earlier around the right-of-way, we're still just beginning to make these changes. And if you look at car culture, 100 and whatever years ago, about 110 years ago, cities weren't built for cars. They were built for people on bikes. They were built for people on horses. They were built for pedestrians. They were built for trams. And cars had sort of started filtering, and then all of a sudden we pivoted and we said, okay, build for cars. And for context, the city of Seattle is about 40% of its land mass is for car parking or car pride. 40% of Seattle. We did that intentionally. And I would suggest we can do that again for different things. I think that Alexander made a great point about we're talking about scooters right now, but what will we talk about next year? I think that's true. I think what we're talking about with scooters is the beginning. It's a sign that people are ready for something different in a time when we dramatically need something different. And this is the time where we have to collaborate and work together to change cities and how we get around them. So, thank you.
So, thanks everyone for having me. Hey Cheng with Spin. I'm 4 months in, recently from the San Francisco Planning Department. So when we're talking about these collective issues, it's been something that I've been thinking about from the other side for a very long time. I worked on streetscape design, tactical urbanism projects, and long-range planning, all that sort of stuff. So now bringing all that to Spin. I'm going to quickly talk about the company in general, and then focus on my program, which is Saving Livable Streets program. Very similar to what Gabriel was talking about. We're just thinking about ways to get people to move in a different way. So making cities better for people with a sustainable mode. We're part of the Ford Mobility Company. We were purchased by them late last year. And starting to work on some more partnerships that I'll talk about towards the end of the slide. 50 cities, 15 campuses, lots of rides. We're all over the U.S. and recently Canada. So just starting to venture into go beyond the country and growing at a breakneck speed. So that's I can't even keep track of which cities we're launching in, but it's really exciting. And for the product itself, going through iterations as well. We just launched a new model which is safer, has a better range, has a handbrake, all sorts of stuff that I'm not expert in, but definitely seeing changes on that front as well. And then the app that we're all familiar with, you unlock it, you get a series of screens
to do a little bit of education before you can ride it, and then the geofencing that some of the cities talked about, so keeping people where we don't want them to be. And parking, of course, is a big issue. There's the app side, but there's also like the real world side, which we'll talk about also. Data, just going through this stuff. We provide dashboards to our cities, and so they can make insights about their users, and then looking at heat maps to make decisions about transportation planning or infrastructure planning. And then for equity in workforce, a couple of slides, also not my expertise, but then just wanted to share, we do have spin access, very similar to what Line has offered. So you don't have to have a smartphone, you can text to pay, that's rolling out in all different cities. Definitely there's room for improvement on how we can expand that program, make it more accessible, and learn as we go. This is an example of sort of a kind of community partnership that we have with Boys and Girls Club in Detroit. So we partnered for the summer, had them sort of do sort of an internship thing where they use scooters to collect data and then taught them. They have trainings with our mechanics to learn how to fix those scooters and then work with them for deployment. So where in their neighborhood should these scooters go? Helping with understanding that they're the experts in their community and where people want to be riding. And then a little bit about workforce. These are slides. This is slides specific to Denver, but in general, we are a W-2 employment model, so we don't have gig economy workers. We are, they're fully full-time employees, and it's just something that our company believes in, that if you have that reliability and are able to do trainings and really have an airtight operation, that helps with the operations as well. So this is an example of the warehouse training and the little teams that my experience with them is that they really get to know each other, they really get to know the cities that they're part of, they take care of these scooters like their little digital herd, they really get to know the streets, so it's really great to see that we're supporting the workforce development in that way. And then about our program. So Safe and Livable Streets program, focusing on bringing from car-centric street design to multimodal, and really thinking about all the different areas that we can improve on. So transit, bike, and pedestrians. We want to help agencies to work faster, and we're doing that with showing what's possible. So creating small-scale projects that can ignite long-term change. So this is an example of a pop-up that we did at Sunday Streets in San Francisco just a couple weeks ago. And so a lot of the scooter training that we were talking about before, my idea was we can also layer on top of that safe streets training. So taking wave delineators, which are outside, partnering them with plants and benches, and really getting people to think about what is best in our streets and partnering that with our state operations. So having the freedom to move means feeling safe no matter what mode of transportation you choose. And the picture on the right is my daughter, so it's really fun to be able to bring her out and feel safe that she could be riding her little scooter along the infrastructure to benefit all modes. And be a valued partner. So work with government and community to rethink the rules of the road. This project in Salt Lake City, which is going to launch next Friday, looking at an intersection and doing some improvements. There was an existing buffered bike lane, partnered with City of Salt Lake and Bike Utah to we hired Team Better Lock to create a series of workshops to paint and install temporary physical separators. So we're painting in the buffered bike lane, but also adding scooter parking and planters and all of that stuff. So it's been a great partnership. The Facebook event that we have was hosted by the mayor, and then we are sponsors of that event. So we're really learning with them, teaching with them, and then getting our hands dirty and trying to improve their infrastructure there. They had a proposed bike lane east-west corridor connection, and they wanted help to test it out, get feedback, and we're helping them do that. So that's exciting. Another aspect of the program is to make safe streets for people, to ensure that our streets are safe and enjoyable for everyone. And so we did a parklet competition that we launched recently. It's to look at parklets and then incorporate them to not just have bike parking, but also scooter charging and parking as well. I announced the competition in June. Finalists were selected, and they're under design and fabrication currently. And then in Denver, there will be 6 parklets on the streets. And then we're also funding Denver Street Partnerships to run Parking Day, so we can sort of expand our reach and just gain more attention to taking over parking spots for something better than just parking a car. And then so just a little bit about the examples that we have that are chosen. So really fun to engage different groups of people to get their ideas on the streets. Denver currently does not have a parklet program, but they're interested in doing that, so kind of helping them move in that direction. Of course, incorporating all the different modes is paramount to our ideas. We asked for solar charging in addition to bike and scooter parking, and benching and seating and shades and all that stuff. And of course, we got so many great examples from around the country and around the world, actually. So it's really fun to be a part of this this movement. At San Francisco Planning, I ran the Parklet program and the Paving to Parks program. So taking that, what I've learned there, and bringing it to other cities has been really fun for me. And yeah, so all of these aren't on our website, but just a little quick thing. This one also incorporates a bus stop opening, so incorporating as many modes as possible and getting vehicles off the street and slowing the street and inviting pedestrians to be a part of this conversation. Op-ed that was written. Oh, and then so just on our website we have more information about our projects. And for the projects that are, there's just 2 of us in this team, so we aren't able to talk to every city that we want to, but we just launched a sort of like a community partnership program, so you could come and submit your ideas to us and we could follow up with you. And then a couple more partnerships, working with streetlight data, so multimodal tracking for data and advocates, so working with cities and advocacy groups to help them sort of understand the data and how they can be better advocates for that. We're organizing tactical urbanism workshops in Vision Zero hotspots, so South Florida, and we're starting South Florida, going to DC, and also looking at piloting mobility islands, so incorporating bus stops with scooter parking and charging as well. Yeah, now we have a partnership with Swift Mile, and this is launched through a couple of cities, and we're looking to scale, and it's scooter parking and charging, so just making that easier for people to have a reliable source when they're trying to get to their scooter. Okay, wrapping up. And there's more about that later, and also transit app integration, and then this will be my last slide about an interesting partnership with Pittsburgh. They did a RFP for basically mobility as a service. So the consortium is Spin for scooters and e-bikes, which is exciting, with that, for mobility with their data analysis, transit app, carpooling with Waze, and Zipcar and Spokane, which is, so we're going to have 50 mobility hubs throughout Pittsburgh, and we're excited to see how this partnership goes.
Great. Hi, I'm Anne. I'm an urban planner at Jump. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm actually from the San Francisco Planning Department as well. So it's really funny to be up here together with Kay. Very fun. So thanks for having me. I'm going to do a broad overview of Jump and talk a little bit about some of our case studies and how we think about equity. This is our small but mighty and all-female urban planning team. Nice. Shout outs. So we're kind of focusing on urban analytics as well as urban design, spread across New York, San Francisco, and Sacramento. And then an intro to Jump. So we were founded in 2010 in Brooklyn as Social Bicycles. In 2013, we launched our first dockless pedal system in Buffalo, New York. In 2015, we started to expand Providence, Rhode Island, Albany, New Orleans. We have a partnership with Motivate, actually, in Portland. And then in 2017, we were rebranded to Jump. We wanted to kind of get on the one-syllable name here. So we launched our first dockless e-bike program there, and then in 2018, we were acquired by Uber. This is some of our cities that we're in. It doesn't include all of them: Europe, Latin America, Asia Pacific cities as well. But hopefully you've gotten to try one in one of the cities that you visited, or if you live in one of these. I know there's been a lot of scooter love, so I'm going to kind of focus on the bike more today. But this is our custom-built bike. It goes up to 20 miles per hour. Some cities we limit that to 15 miles per hour, depends on the regulations. Integrated cable lock, it's retractable, swappable battery, and retractable mounts for your smartphone. And it can go up to 40 miles on a single charge. But we do also have the scooter. I have less fun facts about that, except that our latest version will also have a swappable battery and is custom built. So if you haven't tried it already, it's similar to all the spin and lime as well. Find it on your phone, unlock it with the QR code, retractable lock, can lock to a bike rack or freestanding out of the pedestrian right of way. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the entire platform and how Uber integrates all of us, but this is kind of similar to why I joined Jump and why probably a lot of all of you ride your bikes through cities. It's free and cost effective if it's a jumping. It reduces traffic congestion. It's greener, faster, more active, really fun, and shares the vision of replacing car ownership and really less dependency on the single occupancy vehicle. And we're starting to see that it's working. So this is actually taken from Jamie's midpoint evaluation in San Francisco, where we found that 2/3 of the jump rides were happening in commuter hours, 8 to 6, Monday through Friday, which is really exciting, right? That's when roads are most congested. And we saw that Uber car trips went down, and more unique users came from either the Uber app into Ride and Jump, or they came as already they had Uber, they used Uber, and they were coming over to Jump. So exciting to see that happen. We can do even better, right? So 46% of US vehicle trips are under 3 miles. The average e-bike ride is around 3.6, right? Average scooter ride around 1.3. And 63% of these vehicle trips are under 5 miles. So really, really a lot of trips that we can mode shift into micromobility. This is from a study at UC Davis, so that was really helpful information. And Alex and Briana also kind of touched on this already, and it looks like our data matches as far as the unique users of bikes versus scooters, and we're seeing that only at 13% of overlap in the markets where we have both bikes and scooters, which is really interesting. I think people are just choosing the right vehicle that works for them. And beyond just bikes and scooters, there's a whole platform of other areas where Uber focuses, which I know very little about. And integration with all of these takes a long time, but we're already seeing some progress. So I'll kind of skip through these kind of quickly, but Uber Cash, you can get cash from just dropping off a bike, a low battery bike at a hub. So that incentive and that cash can be used towards Uber Eats, your rides, or Jump. So that's a great benefit for users. If you had asked me 2 years ago if Uber was going to be plastered on public transportation, I would have laughed at you. But here it is. We have partnered with Denver Public Transit Agency, which is really exciting. So now when you open up your Uber app in Denver, you're at the airport, and you think about taking a ride, we'll also tell you how you can get there by train. And Ride Pass is kind of the monthly pass that now you can use it for your Uber rides, you can use it for bikes, for scooters. So really cool to see this all starting to integrate. And again, kind of have users think about a mode shift over to bikes. These I'm very excited about. I'll play this while I talk. But most of I didn't know that the sound would go on. Very over that. But it's a very cute video teaching the kind of riders and drivers about the Dutch Reach, right? A lot of us are avid cyclists, and we know about like the Dutch Reach where you and get your seatbelt in the door and look for a rider in a bike lane next to you. But this is kind of a new education campaign that we did. The other one I'm really excited about is that you can see in the app how it goes. This is a new pilot. I think it's only in San Francisco and DC, but it's a bike lane alert for any any Uber rider or driver. So if we urban planning partnered with Uber to kind of show them where the bike networks were in each city, so that if you're dropping off, you're in a TNC, you can now see when you're on a bike network and you'll get a notification like, hey, watch out for any riders. And I'd say this is very exciting. I know it's a small step, but I think it's really exciting. And then we're doing integration not only on the app, but also on the street, right? So we need to think about the entire curve. We all know that very well, but this is some of the education and work we're doing to teach not only internal stakeholders, but as well as showing the cities that we can comply with parking requirements and that we understand where the right-of-way is, and how each city is really different and has very unique requirements. So then I'll touch briefly on kind of what we think around equity. Joel mentioned our low-income affordable payment plan, as well as some of our deployment focuses in each city that we go in. But I'll look at some of our geospatial and how JUMP is different from some of our other providers. And JUMP, I'll kind of toggle between these two maps, but it's kind of showing that JUMP as a dockless and e-bike solution can really focus on some of the gaps where transit and docked bike share aren't serving. And we saw that a third of our trips were either ending or starting in these areas kind of on the map on the far right, where there is low transit frequency or docked bike share isn't reaching. So we really see these two things as complementary, and we're not only focusing on the first mile, but also areas where there is very low transit frequency. And then another quick focus is on Sacramento, where we're actually doing door-to-door canvassing. You know, I think it was talked about earlier how the scooter or bike will just land in a community and they won't really be sure to use it. So we're going door to door, we're asking people if they want bike parking in their neighborhood, we're showing them how to use the bike, doing the safety workshops, and having those one-on-one conversations is really valuable. And as we know, I don't think any of that can happen without engaging folks in the community and understand where people want to see bike share. So really excited to keep that conversation going and have more discussion with all of you. Thanks.
Okay. All right, so thank you all for presenting. Actually, I have a question for the audience. I just want to know, in the cities that you live in, how many, is there a micromobility program in the city that you live in? Okay, so I'd say the majority of the group. So my first question is, you all talked about the different cities that you're located in, and I'm curious how you decide to enter a market, and then also how do you decide to stay or leave?
Okay, this is not, there's like a whole team and experts on this. I know there's criteria that they rank, and we have like government relations team, we have our community partnerships team, and our business team that evaluates that. So it's not a very great answer for me. So that's not my expertise. But yeah, but it does have to do with you know, the permit that's available and the market and how it's doing. Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna add, kind of one of the reasons maybe we stay or why we leave would kind of be on like the long-term success of the market. And I think this was already touched on in the city providers, but is there the safe infrastructure for all the riders? Because I think what we're seeing is the increase of micromobility happens so quickly that the infrastructure as far as safe bike lanes and safe bike parking for everyone, it's really, really important to keep all of our riders safe and really ensure the safety of everyone. So I think that is going to be a big factor in where we stay.
I agree. I think that the change we've seen in the last couple of years has been that in the early days of scooters in particular and dockless generally, there was a degree of opportunism, which is to say what cities didn't have something already where we have to compete more. And I think now all of us are having to be more sophisticated. Cities are deciding how they want this to be. Do they want one or more vendors, as you've heard earlier? I would say that the decision to stay in some degree hinges on, can we collaborate together? And I think that the need to collaborate between cities and providers is huge, no matter if you have a Spokane situation where you have one provider plus the city, or you have a Portland where you have 6 providers. How do you best work together to make this work? Because at the end of the day, for us, We have lofty goals around changing the world. I was hopefully pretty blunt about those. And we have to build a sustainable business. And there was a reference earlier to the VC dollars backing all of these companies. That's going to go away, right? At the end of the day, we have to build a sustainable, viable business. And we're seeing that in some of our predecessor companies who have hit the stock market and are trying to figure out, like, how do we make this work? We don't have venture dollars forever and ever. Lime has raised a tremendous amount of money. We've launched over 100 cities. That costs a whole lot of money. Every city we enter, we have new capital costs building, putting in all these scooters. We hire teams. Our team in Seattle, for example, with the 4,000 bikes is over 50 FTEs. That's a lot of people that we're paying for. So the balance and the ability to trust and collaborate with cities, I think, is the key to deciding that we both want us to stay, whoever we are in whatever city we're talking about. How can we build a viable business that will be here to serve the needs of the residents and visitors of a given city while also doing so in a responsible way? And I think that's going to be a lot of give and take, and the ability to stay will hinge on, can we actually sustain a business?
And kind of along those same lines, you all have mixed fleets, and I know Seattle might be the only city with e-bikes.
No.
Okay.
The only city with the Lime Pod, which is the car.
Okay. And then so select cities have e-bikes, and then Kate mentioned e-bikes are coming back, and then primarily for Jump, it seems like primarily bikes. So I'm kind of curious, how do you decide on that on the fleet breakdown?
I think that they're really complementary, and we haven't, I think showing that there are really unique users. I think we're trying to find if topography will define whether a rider takes a bike or a scooter, but we haven't seen kind of clear data on that yet. I think there's a lot of research out there. I think really the only loser here is the private car, so, yeah.
Speaking of us, I think we had pedal bikes in the initial 6 months to a year of our operation. We phased them all out because they didn't get ridership. And back to the idea of building a viable business, we have to actually do that. So with e-bikes, we do reasonably well, but a low-performing scooter market outdoes a high-performing e-bike market almost everywhere we operate. So a lot of it does come down to economics, and if you look at permit fees, for example, that can influence our decision. If you give us a flat fee for a bike or a scooter, we're going to pick the scooter every time because that is the one that will make us whole enough to actually operate in a given city. So I think we're learning a lot. Like Lime at first, I would have posited that e-bikes would be a crucial piece of things. When scooters came along, ours and others, we saw that the numbers simply outperformed. And again, we have to build a viable business if we're going to survive. So we look at a lot of the metrics on both of these types of vehicles and the next and the next. One of the names that was going to be here today, and I'm sorry they're not, is Gotcha. And they came out with a 3-wheeled trike electric thing. I don't know what you call it. I think it's awesome. And that kind of innovation is going to keep happening. And from my perspective, the necessity here is for cities to create frameworks in which we can test these new things, in which we can learn what does work, what will people adopt, and make that choice to get out of a car. And I think we're going to continually be evaluating, can we operate in this city? Can we build a viable business that allows us to sustain? Some of us won't, and maybe that's us, maybe it's not, but some of us won't survive, and so we've got to figure that out, and the fleet mix is a key piece of that.
Yeah, seeing your technology evolving over the next 5 years, so what do you think is going to be key, and what's coming out next? And then one more thing, I'm really interested in kind of transit integration, and are you, in addition to just trip planning, are you working with transit agencies? So, good question, but along those lines.
So we have I mentioned Denver, we have a really close relationship with SAC-RT, the Regional Transit Agency in Sacramento, where we have partnered to put down charging stations on their property. Really excited to see that connection, and we're out there doing intercept surveys right now to understand, are these users using it for transit, right? You can't really tell that by just looking at the data of where the trip ends. They might just be walking to their home nearby, but it's really exciting to start to see, this is actually working as a transit connection. What was the the future of the fleet. I talked a little bit about swappable batteries, and I think the future there is that it'll be rider will be able to swap the battery themselves. Right now it's only our field techs, but in the future we hope that the rider can actually take out a battery of the bike or scooter, go to a kiosk, get a fresh battery, put the battery back in the bike or scooter, which is exciting and it's cool. It's interesting. It's another piece that where those kiosks sit in the public realm. I think we'll have to think really closely and thoughtfully about that. But yeah.
So fleet mix, it's definitely interesting. I don't know, 6 months ago wouldn't have seen myself at a scooter company, but I'm, just thinking about all the different ways to get us out of cars. So we started with bikes, and we got rid of bikes, and then now we have bikes again. And I think, to Gabriel's point, it's what our city's asking for, what are our users asking for. Definitely scooters, to my knowledge, are as same as Lime, outpace bikes. So where in Pittsburgh they specifically asked for them, we're doing that, and I think by putting them all together in an integrated app with transit, carpool, zip car, bike, and scooter, it's gonna be a really great learning lesson for the city and us to see how we can potentially replicate that model moving forward. And then there's all sorts of exciting things, 3 wheels and other types of interesting seated things that Spin is definitely looking at, and we'll be hopefully testing out in the real world soon.
Okay. As far as the next things, take batteries and add wheels and imagine. That's where we're headed, I think. I think what'll be interesting is to see how cities can engage with these trends. So, Alexander from Minneapolis spoke about renaming bike lanes as, I think he said, low-speed vehicle lanes.
Low-power vehicles.
Low-power vehicles. To me, neighborhood electric vehicle plus low-powered smaller vehicles is where this all heads. There's a mashup of things that we used to call cars and bikes and scooters into these new little things that go slower and move us easily around neighborhoods and cities, or between neighborhoods maybe. But to the point earlier that Ann made, the vast majority of trips are actually pretty short. And you have different use cases. I'm going grocery shopping, I'm not. I'm taking a kid, I'm not. Like, you need a variety of different types of vehicles. To me, what would be really interesting and what will become interesting is how cities engage with this. So do cities say, we actually want to push the needle really hard, and we want to deprioritize cars and prioritize these new things? That is a deliberate choice that can be made. It has to do with parking, it has to do with where they drive, making a safe space that is not the pedestrian space, but is also not necessarily the car space. And that's to some degree going to guide which of these things can come out. Classification is another interesting thing. When we first started launching scooters, one of the issues we ran into was that in states where they classify vehicles, you have cars, which are defined as things that are car-like, right? You have bicycles, which we all understand to be a bicycle-like thing. And then scooters came out, and cities in many states looked at them and said, well, we're looking at our state code, and this isn't a bike exactly, but it's not a moped exactly either. And our state code doesn't really tell us what to do with this. Where do we put it? Where is an appropriate place for it to ride? And so classification is a really oddly important thing that is really, wonky. But working with state legislatures to figure out how do we call these new things and where do we put them? What's appropriate? And that's where I think cities are going to have an opportunity to lead, to say we want to shift the paradigm and we want to move it away from cars. But to do that, there are a lot of weird things that have to play together.
All right, well, great.
Oh, I would just add one thing that you were starting to touch on too, and this is more of an Anne Brask secret dream than an Uber actuality. But I've been thinking a lot about a partnership with Uber Eats, where I just think it's so crazy that one Uber Eats courier will be driving around one pizza in a car. And you're thinking about right sizing the vehicle, and I'm like, maybe there's is it a cargo bike or a pizza bike or something, something actually that is the right size of what people are using it for. So.
Well, thank you all.
Stay up here if you like. We'll bring you back up soon enough. But right now we're going to shift gears and we're going to go to a little presentation on data by William Henderson of RideReport.
Awesome, thank you very much. So I'm William Henderson. I'm founder and CEO of RideReport. We work with cities and micromobility providers all over the world. And our goal is really to help cities make micromobility work. And I want to talk about what that means from the different sort of perspectives and how data is at the center of that. But just wanted to start with my own personal story. It says here I'm a computer geek, so I'm outed, I know how to write code and stuff like that. And that was my day job for a long time, and then I would get home and do bike advocacy. So I was riding my bike all over Portland and learning how to interface with city government and sitting on various committees and panels and all of that stuff. Right about the time that I decided to merge my professional and personal interests was when Uber and Lyft were happening to cities. And so I was sitting and watching, Uber and Lyft and all the ride-hailing disruption happen and thought, surely there's a better way. So I'll just start with that elephant in the room maybe. That ride-hailing didn't go so well. It's not the model that we want to pursue going forward. We've learned a lot. I think one of those things that is really, really clear though is that cities don't want to have the same pattern happen again. So that's why I'm starting here. We don't want to do this again. And sometimes, I mean, if you're paying attention to the news, you might think that scooter sharing is kind of going the same way, right? So you read all these articles about people getting hurt or blocking the sidewalk or companies breaking the rules. And it sounds really familiar. And I think it's worth unpacking a little bit. There's some sensationalism here. I thought it was a really great point to just observe that, you know, whereas ride-hailing kind of was invisible in that it didn't change the form factor, it's still cars driving around. Scooters are really, really visible. If you go back to the early days of the car, people reacted with outrage that you would park your personally owned vehicle on the street in the beginning. So some of that's going on, but there's some real things as well. And I like to look at it from sort of 3 different perspectives that, you know, kind of speak to me. I'm a person that wants to ride these bikes and these scooters. I'm a person that cares about the needs of cities and city governments. And I'm also someone that understands what it's like to be a part of a tech company that's moving really quickly. And so cities, of course, I think, have this really real concern, some of which is informed by our experience collectively with ride-hailing, about losing control. You don't want to lose control of the right of way. We also don't want someone to get hurt, right? And there are potential liability concerns if somebody crashes a scooter or somebody trips over a scooter. So that's a real thing. And then operators don't really feel understood, right? They're trying to run a business. They don't necessarily feel like cities are listening. And of course, cities didn't really feel like companies were coming to them in the ride-hailing days proactively and trying to work with them. So there might be a little bit of a degree of skepticism and mistrust here. And then citizens are just like, hey, just give me the scooter, or alternatively, just get it out of my car. So these are all really different perspectives, all sort of fighting to coexist. And then, you know, this is why I kind of started with my background. Take a step back here. This is what we're up against, right? And every single one of those constituencies, whether it's an operator, someone in city government, or a citizen, does not want this. No one wants this. In fact, we really need micromobility to succeed. So I think I like to start here, because I think ride-hailing, you know, had its own challenges, and there's, you know, some pluses and minuses to ride-hailing. At the end of the day, I think ride-hailing has a role, but it's not going to help us solve this. Micromobility, I think, has a real role in helping us solve this. And, you know, I just think about my roots as a bike advocate, fighting for every single tiny, you know, bike parking installation or a strip of paint somewhere. And it's this incremental progress that is so important, but it's really hard to chip away at something like this. So I get really excited when I see what's going on in the micromobility space. And I think it's all about how we do it, right? And what we want is we want to have a collaborative model. We want to have a model where we're working together because we do have this shared goal. So you can kind of reframe those concerns that I listed earlier in terms of needs that we have. So cities need to provide transportation options that are safer, more equitable, more sustainable than what we have now. Operators need to be able to create a profitable service that people love using, right? If they can't achieve profitability quickly, they won't stay around, and then this service won't exist. And citizens need access to reliable and safe transportation, right? So it's the same 3 concerns, but reframed a little bit in a way where there's a little bit more commonality here starting to emerge. And what I think is interesting, what we've learned in working with cities and operators, is that data is kind of at the middle of all of this, right? So data, I sort of think about it as this pyramid, right, where it's almost like the hierarchy of needs. At the top, you have the potential, which is for cities to collaborate with operators and for citizens to be better served. And at the bottom, you have data. So cities need data that they can trust, and it needs to be in a standard non-proprietary format. So you've probably heard of MDS. I think it's a really important step forward because cities need to know that the data that they're getting is going to be useful in a long-range way, regardless of which of these companies sticks around, who wins, who loses. And operators need to be recognized when they share accurate and high-quality data. So this is something that I see really often, which is that an operator that is willing to share high-quality data feels like they're not being treated any differently from an operator who's not sharing, or who's sharing, sort of low-quality data. And I think it's so important that there's some recognition there, because otherwise the incentives get all wonky, and then everybody stops sharing. And we don't want to go back to that place. We're not going to have collaboration without data sharing. It's just not going to happen. And then citizens have a real important need as well. And I don't think this gets talked about enough. Citizens need their data to be shared in a way that respects their right to privacy. And if we don't get this right, I think it has the potential to undermine everything that we're doing here, right? So if a citizen feels like, I'm not sure when I get on this scooter if my data and my privacy is being protected, they might not choose to use that mode of transportation, right? Especially if they're a member of a vulnerable population. And then cities who need control of the right of way could have that undermined if there's a big privacy disaster. Because we could have state or federal preemption that, where your lobbyists are pointing to some privacy breach and using that to strip cities of the control that they need. So it's really important that we get citizen privacy right. And I wanted to just share a little bit about what we do. We sort of see a big part of our role is just making sure that cities have access to the data that they need and that they actually know that they're getting trustworthy data. So this was touched on a little bit earlier. It's really difficult when you have a whole bunch of operators applying in your city to know whether you're going to get the data that you're being promised and to evaluate whether that data is actually accurate and trustworthy. So one of the things that we've done is we've created these audits of MDS data feeds from operators all around the world. And we evaluate every element of the MDS specification and assign it a score, in addition to some best practices that we've seen emerge from cities. And this way, before micromobility launches in your city, whether you have what you need. It's just a simple pass-fail number that you can look at. And we've found that it's really helpful just to have this report because not only do you know what you're getting, but it gives that incentive to the operators to provide high-quality data. So they know that they're providing high-quality data, that they actually do get some recognition versus an operator that's not sharing at all or sharing low-quality data. And we've done this, for several months all over the place, and we've seen some patterns in behavior, right? So we've found some operators are providing really high-quality data and are being very proactive about addressing any concerns in their data, and then other operators are still coming along. So what we've done more recently is we've created a new program called RideReport Certified, and basically this is like a stamp of approval that tells cities, hey, this is a data feed that you can trust. It does three things. Essentially, first, it's guaranteed MDS access, right? So you know that the data you're getting actually meets the MDS specification, and you know that you're going to be able to continue getting it. You're not going to have the MDS be dangled in front of you when you're permitting, and then later the feed suddenly goes down. The second thing is that it provides recognition for excellent data. So operators that are consistently meeting or exceeding the bar are getting some recognition by joining the certified program. It doesn't cost them anything. They don't make any money on this. This is just essentially if you have a high score, you're willing to make commitments to keeping that score high, then you are offered the certified status. And then the last thing is we ask operators who are becoming RideReport certified to guarantee that they're going to work to protect citizen privacy. So I think we all have a role in preserving this, and I mentioned what's at stake here with privacy, so we want to make that sort of the third leg of the stool with this. And today, I'm really happy to just share that we have 3 operators who become certified, Bird, Lime, and Bolt. We're working with lots more operators to get them certified as well. Our goal is to certify every operator that is capable of providing high-quality data and making commitments to continue to offer that to cities. So that's all. Thank you.
Don't go away, William. Why doesn't everyone come up here and pull up a chair if there's not enough at the table? Let's get everyone up here for our grand finale. All right, so we have 40 questions and 10 minutes to do them all. We're not going to get to all of them, obviously, but our panelists will be around, and I'm sure happy to engage with you after this. So, all right, we're going to get cozy up here and have some conversations. You guys are hiding over here. You think you're going to get off easy? Okay. All right, so let's just get the dialogue going. We've heard a lot about how cities and micromobility providers work together and some of the things that are working and the sticking points. How do you guys decide who's responsible for what, and how are cities accounting for the staffing needs required to take on your responsibilities? Yeah, just jump right in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to think about it, and cities are approaching it differently. One thing that we did in Seattle was we set our permit fees in a way that we knew at the beginning of the year how much money were coming in, and that way we could plan for the full year's operations of budgeting, our staff time, or what we're putting to bike parking, what we're putting to adaptive cycling, equity, to make sure that it's all covered. So that's one way to do it, but then you lose some flexibility also with that.
I guess I can speak to that flexibility because we wanted to have a program that could expand throughout the year. And so we really needed to be able to charge for that expansion if we had additional scooters, additional rides, equal additional complaints, and additional data to manage. So we have a number of kind of per scooter, per ride fees that support that work. I think the questions to ask your city, if you're looking at how you want to do this, is what's your internal capacity and expertise? Does it make sense to do data internally? Do you want to work with a third party like RideReport or Panelists or one of the others? And how does your city feel about, I think we're still grappling with this. What's our role in terms of making sure that equitable service is provided, low-income service is provided, the education programs are provided? Is that a role that we should be paying for, or is that a role that we expect companies to pay for or do?
Okay, I guess to a provider, what are your biggest needs from cities?
I would say collaboration and, in as much as possible, openness to exchange information. We as providers have a lot to offer. We're going to mess up too. And in my ideal world, I used to work directly with cities and government relations for Lyman. In that ideal world, I would hear from you before it was a really hot issue, because you were starting to see something that wasn't working. And conversely, we would try to be as honest as possible about what we needed to make this work. I think collaboration and trust are key. This is back to some of the hoity-toity statements I made earlier. This is really disruptive, and that's scary and hard, but it almost needs to go faster and bigger and harder. And the only way that succeeds is the more we can work together, the more we can see each other as two sides of a really important coin that have to collaborate and have to build trust and have to maintain that trust. And when we screw up, call us out on it. And when we can see opportunities for bigger growth, call us for that too. That to me is the biggest single thing. And I don't think either side can do this on their own right now. I think we both need each other pretty badly to succeed.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would just kind of add on what Gabriel is saying as far as I love the ambitious asks from cities, but I think also being able to open up the dialogue for us to say hey, this actually won't work and be feasible for our operations. And I would also add kind of good data sets on where your bike parking is. That would be great.
Thank you. Specifics are very helpful. Okay, here's a juicy question. Is sidewalk riding the failure of cities to provide adequate infrastructure?
Yes, but, right? This is the last year and a half. So yes, it is. And nobody could have expected it to be any different. We've done surveys of our riders. Over 80% say I switched to a sidewalk from a road because I didn't feel safe on the road. But that just speaks to the fact that we haven't evolved the city. Of course, it doesn't work right now. This is new.
Any cities want to chime in?
I think that's more or less correct. Also, the infrastructure that we have is not built for scooter riders and they ride on the sidewalk. And ultimately, if scooters are going to be part of the transportation system, we're going to need to have protective lanes for them to ride on. So I agree.
And how might facilities that are designed for bikes need to be changed to accommodate scooters and or other types of devices like we're talking about maybe about in the future?
So in Salt Lake, we're testing the widths, looking at speeds and safe passing. So, we know that bike people can go at a certain speed. We know that cargo bike will go at a certain speed. We know that scooter riders are smaller, but they can go next to each other. So testing all that in sort of a tactical urbanism way is a great idea, and especially cities that are willing to test with us so that we can evolve and have modal harmony is ideal.
Fantastic. What is the average lifespan of a scooter and a shared bicycle? E-bike, I guess, since we're talking about e-bikes mostly here. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I know that number. Maybe I'm not enough on the bike design side to be able to tell you that.
I can share that. So it's been reported in the press that some scooters have a lifespan as low as a month of life. I would say that this, again, is an opportunity for innovation and the fact that this is a totally new thing. So the first round of scooters came out, they were consumer model off-the-shelf technology. They broke down really, really fast. We designed ours from the beginning, but they broke down really fast as well. So the number I just gave, 28 days, that was an industry-wide number that was held out for a while. We're on Gen 3 of our scooters. What that actually means in terms of hardware iterations is probably around 10 generations in terms of our innovation on it and continue to improve. So we're thinking now they should go maybe 6 to 12 months. That's the current hope on the current generation. That's still not good enough. Obviously, relative to cars, that's a lot less life. So we're continuing to work on that all the time. With our bikes, our fleet in Seattle, I would say some of those are starting to feel older, but that's said they're at a year and a half for the majority. I don't think we've deployed a lot of new stock this year in Seattle, and that's whatever, 4,000 or I don't know what the number is, but so that they're at a year and a half and going. Some of the aging piece of it is simply a matter of like how much abuse they take from the community. So it's very highlighted. If you throw a scooter in a river or a bike in a river, it's going to age a lot faster.
I just added that this is a question that we're posing as part of our pilot. It's actually a requirement for all of our permit holders to submit a life cycle assessment. Those are going to be due for the first companies who got permitted October 26th. So I'm really excited to get to know those stats a little bit more.
Yeah, being new to the company, our group was pushing for that, and so going back to the relationship between operators and cities, we've kind of said to cities, hey, if you ask for this, that'll help us internally push for a full life cycle analysis, which we've been wanting to do internally, but business team has a different directive of getting maximum dollars per scooter per day, right? So I think that's something moving forward to all the other speakers here, building trust and having that dialogue has been really helpful to push for the greater good.
I don't want to belabor this one too much, but it goes beyond the dollars and cents. If the scooter breaks down, that's potentially a crash, it's potentially an injury. So that's something that when, as a city or municipality, you're preparing your permit, your operating requirements, you can set up as negotiation point. This is something we did in Spokane. Is we said, we want you to pay a certain amount to operate within the right of way, but you can potentially negotiate that down if you have a better service show than the industry would generally do. So show us how your equipment lasts longer, or your service level on the equipment is such that it operates better or safer. And we know that costs you more than maybe the general industry is willing to pay, so we'll value that in that fee. So there's different ways that can be approached. Really, it comes down to the people, the users. We have to think beyond the dollars and cents sometimes.
Great. So how heavy of a lift are you finding enforcement, and what are both cities and providers doing to respond to that?
So the city of Minneapolis has a 311 system where you can submit complaints, and we allow people, residents to provide complaints that we track and monitor. I alluded to it in my presentation. We are providing more clear signage about places where you're not supposed to be cycling. Geofencing is an option, and also just providing parking facilities on the street. I had my slide up with the white marked area where scooters can park. So just providing signage and constant reminders. And I'm also curious to see how the providers are providing information within their apps on scooter compliance. I think that's a really critical component that has a lot of opportunity to evolve.
We use 311 in San Francisco as well. We'll say a couple of things on enforcement. One, on the sidewalk riding, we don't do any enforcement ourselves, partially because the police department doesn't have resources, and from a policy standpoint, we're not really keen on handing out a lot of tickets to people riding on sidewalks. But through 311, we have worked with companies to give warnings to individual riders, and in a couple of cases actually suspend their accounts based on repeated instances of sidewalk riding. For parking, we use our taxi inspectors, who, as the taxi industry has collapsed in the last 8 years, we had some staff that didn't have anything to do, and so we've assigned the taxi inspectors to investigate parking complaints, and they issue citations to the companies when they're improperly parked scooters.
Yeah, in Portland, we're doing enforcement this year. As I mentioned in the slideshow, my colleague Tim Moore is leading a team in regulatory and parking enforcement, working with companies to issue fines and warnings to users. So that's PBOT staff going out and documenting those instances. We also have complaints that come in through all channels, but we also have been trying to get our public to go directly to companies if there's a parking issue. We really feel like companies are the most able to respond quickly to those instances. In our first pilot, it took us over a week to respond to all of the parking complaints, and at that point, it's no longer there. So that is one switch that we've made that I think has helped internally in our operations, and I think it's just more honest to what we really have the capacity to do.
So Seattle, when we designed our audit that I talked about a little bit, an enforcement mechanism for the permit, it speaks to how quickly this all changes. There was a lot of competition for our bike share program, and we knew a lot of vendors wanted to come in and launch a lot of bikes, and so we said, okay, let's set this goal-oriented program where if you're not meeting goals as a company, we'll reduce your fleets. And that way, the companies that are meeting goals will have a competitive advantage. Well, in the 3 or 4 months between writing our permit and launching it, scooters happened, and there was lower investment in bike share. And so what we saw this year is neither company is compliant, and now we're in this position where are we going to reduce the fleets for both companies and really then reduce our mobility in the city. That's something we don't want to do. We have right now we are reducing their maximum allowed fleets, but that's not reducing the number of bikes on the street because they're not at that maximum, but they're getting close. And so I think it's just a testament to how quickly this is changing, that this kind of very idealistic, goal-oriented approach will need to be amended as we move forward.
Okay, just to make a note, we are at time, so if you have to go, you're welcome to, but we'll probably get to a couple more. Hopefully, I'd like to hear from a provider on this question, and then maybe we'll ask about data sharing, just to keep you all have to stay. Yeah, enforcement, if there's what providers are doing to contribute to that.
Yeah, a lot of the cities we operate in, when there is a parking complaint, the cities require us to respond in less than 2 hours, which is a really hard number to hit. We're doing our best, and I think we're doing a pretty good job at making that. We also have we share, many cities, I know LA for sure, their 311 system goes directly to us, so we're able to track how we're doing on parking complaints, where they're tending to happen, whether it's on the boardwalk or in Venice or wherever. So that's been really great, and I think, we've touched on this a little bit, but education within the app, and having riders take pictures of where their scooter is properly parked is helpful too.
Thank you. So one of the other main themes of the questions was data sharing, and What value do providers see in sharing data with cities and the public? And how does it align with your mission?
Okay, so I think being able to share data in a meaningful way. So when I was at SF Planning, was part of a emerging mobility data cohort, and I was like, all these companies are popping up. Let's ask for everything. Oh wait, if we have everything, what are we going to do with it? So you want to ask for the right thing. From the provider side, if we're able to provide data that's useful towards like bike planning or infrastructure planning, that's great because it benefits both of us. So getting to that, and I know MDS aside of those bigger meta questions, but just thinking about, practically speaking, getting it to the right person and the people who are doing the planning and implementation is beneficial for both sides.
All right. Yep. Someone else want to add something?
I would second that, and also what William said earlier, with a really heavy emphasis on sharing the essential amount of data, but no more, and in a way that protects privacy of residents and visitors who are riding these devices. There was a data release a few months back that was cited by a researcher who was able to de-identify that aggregate anonymized data of shared bike trips, and they did it very quickly, and were able to de-anonymize this sense of like, this is who did this trip in this place. And I think that's something that we are all learning, right? Like none of us have this all nailed yet, but asking for the right amount of data, using that data in a responsible way, in a way that protects privacy of the people who are doing the riding, I think is really important. And I'd like to see it be a part of a much bigger societal conversation that I don't think we're really having yet. Facebook kind of sort of opened that with Cambridge Analytica and stuff. Like we started talking a little about privacy, but I don't think we as a society have really reckoned yet with the devices in our pockets and all the other things that we're sharing. So I'm hoping that maybe with micromobility, this does prod more conversations as cities take stands on how much they're willing to collect and save and share versus how much they don't think they need. And on our part, how do we protect that data as well, and how do we share it responsibly?
Yeah. Okay. We don't think we should collect some of this data. We need aggregate data, of course, for planning, and we need to be able to evaluate the program, but we don't need to know where I'm going in real time. But maybe the companies that are operating our streets don't need to know that either. Or maybe there could be strict limitations on how long they store that, and how they monetize that, and who they share it with. So that's a role that the cities could play. And it would really flip the script, right? Because instead of cities saying, well, companies are doing invasive things, we should be, get the same level of access, we could sort of raise the bar for everyone, and I think that would be serious progress.
I like it. Anyone want to share any last notes on progress and how we're all going to move forward successfully? Yeah. Alexander, you've been pretty quiet over there.
I mean, just seeing all the trips, Gabriel said, 65 million trips? There's a lot of activity. I think all of us, I got in this profession because I was really into bikes, and it's evolved so much beyond that. And bike mode share is relatively stagnant. I cycle to work every day. I probably will continue to do so even in the winter. But I think we need to continue to embrace these things that get people out of single occupancy vehicles. It decouples the ownership of the device. It encourages people to try something that's new, and it just gives them that perspective. It allows you to experience the built environment in a very similar way to biking and walking, but it doesn't have some of those maybe negative stigmas that some people associate with that stuff. So whatever the new technology is, as long as it's environmentally friendly and safe and affordable and equitable in terms of its coverage, I think we should all continue to adapt it into the roles we do in our various organizations.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you all so much for your attention and everybody for your presentation.